Six Flags Magic Mountain has more roller coasters than any other park on the planet, and today we're gonna rank all 20 of them. I live in Southern California, so I've been to this park plenty of times, and I've been on all of their major roller coasters dozens of times. I've been on every attraction on this list except for the bottom 3, so let's get those out of the way right away. Starting off at number 20 is Magic Flyer, number 19 is Canyon Blaster, and number 18 is Speedy Gonzales Hot Rod Racers. These are the 3 kiddie coasters that I have not experienced in this park. Magic Flyer is by far the smallest in terms of scale, and I believe that adults aren't even allowed to ride it, so I can never get this credit, which, whatever. 19 is Canyon Blaster. It just looks a little jank. Number 18, Speedy Gonzales Hot Rod Racers, is the newest of the kiddie coasters at Magic Mountain. It doesn't look like there's anything wrong with it. It looks very similar to Whistle Punk Chasers at Dollywood, which is an attraction I've done before. Moving on to number 17 is Roadrunner Express. This is also a kiddie coaster, but it's much larger in scale. It's like bordering a family coaster, but I would still count it as a kiddie coaster. It's fine. It's basically the same thing as Gadget Go Coaster in Toontown at Disneyland. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's just another kiddie coaster. These rides are really overkill. And it doesn't help that they're all right next to each other. Like, maybe if they were spread out in this pretty massive park, it would feel more acceptable. But because we have 4 kiddie coasters all right next to each other at Magic Mountain, it feels beyond redundant. It's a little insane. But Roadrunner Express is definitely the most notable attraction. Moving up to number 16 is Gold Rusher. This ride is like one of the OGs in the park. It's a terrain coaster. It goes under Superman a couple times. You get a nice view of the giant full throttle loop, and that's pretty cool. It also has a decent helix at the very end, which is probably the only notable part of the ride in terms of layout and ride experience. But other than that, it's pretty scenic. It's a little janky. It's definitely not that smooth, so it's fine. In terms of family coasters, this park could definitely have a larger offering, because it's basically just this ride, which is old and janky, and number 15, which is Ninja, which is also kind of an outdated attraction. Ninja is fine. It's a suspended coaster, so there are a couple moments where you get some nice positive G's, but it never gets too intense. I would definitely still consider it a family coaster. Unlike the Bat at Kings Island, which is by far the best suspended coaster I've ever ridden, that thing is like pretty much a thrill ride because it's much more fast-paced and pretty intense. But Ninja is alright. The area of the park that it's in is actually really ugly, so I think that's a major mark against Ninja. Goes over Jetstream, and I believe the area used to be like wooded, but then an accident happened where a tree branch fell on top of a ride vehicle, and I think it derailed the first car on a train. I believe everyone was okay. I'm not entirely sure, but now that whole corner of the park is just beyond ugly. It looks so bad. So this is probably one of the ugliest rides in the park. In terms of ride experience, it's pretty solid. So we're moving on up from the family coaster tier and into the thrill coaster tier, with 4 inverting coasters that we're going to talk about. Starting with number 14, which is Revolution. This is the original loop, period. The first loop on the entire planet. So, well, the first modern loop on the entire planet, I should say. This is a Schwarzkopf loop, so if you've been on literally any Schwarzkopf, you know exactly what this loop feels like. It's a really solid element, but other than that, this ride does a lot of meandering around. There are a couple like solid drops that they don't give airtime at all, but they're just decent in length. It kind of reminds me of the big drop on Incredicoaster. It kind of feels the same, but the loop on this ride is much better than the loop on Incredicoaster. I do like the setting, and unlike Ninja, this ride is actually aesthetically pleasing to be around, so I greatly appreciate that. Number 13 is Riddler's Revenge. I feel like this ride is always closed when I go to the park, at least when I had a season pass in 2023. I only got to ride this ride for the first time in a few years recently, and I think it's okay. I am not a fan of the stand-up position like most people, and the layout didn't really have that many special moments. This is not my type of ride. Like, if you love positive G-forces and you don't mind the stand-up position, then you'll probably love this thing, and I know there's a good amount of people people that do love Riddler's Revenge, but it's just not for me. I favor negative G-forces over positive G-forces, but I can still appreciate positive G-forces. But when an attraction is very positive G heavy, I like to have it balanced out a little bit. Like Intimidator 305, I feel like is the perfect example because it provides negative G-forces while having insane positives. But old school B&Ms like Riddler's Revenge, just they're constant. It feels very one note, you know, and it's not my favorite note to hear. You combine that with the stand-up position and it's kind of a meh ride for me. I do like the corkscrews though. I feel like those are definitely my favorite inversions on this attraction, especially the second one because as of the last time I rode this attraction, it had like a really cool near miss with a tree, so I think that's really cool. By the way, this park has so many inversions. It's like ridiculous how many inversions this park has. I actually made a full video ranking every single one in the park, so you should definitely check that one out. Anyway, moving on to number 12, this is Viper. This is kind of the same discussion as Riddler's Revenge. I just think it's a little better. The nice thing about Viper is you pretty much never have to wait for it, so that's great. It's also stupid intense. It's insane. The 3 vertical loops back to back to back is just wild. One time, very recently, I rode the attraction and I grayed out hard. And it like wasn't even that hot. But during those back-to-back loops, it was just crazy. I think my ear popped too, and I like heard the voice of God or something. It was a wild ride experience. Those 3 loops are pretty insane. They can also be a little uncomfortable, so just take note of that. On top of that, you have the arrow restraints, which I'm not a big fan of. They come down kind of hard on your shoulders if you're a little tall, but the perk about being tall is that your head clears the restraint so you can't get any head banging, so I would probably prefer that to being short and having my head slam up against the restraint over and over again. I do actually like the drop on this ride too. You can like whip down that thing, but the transitions can be a little gnarly. I feel like the worst transitions in this ride occur during the Batwing because that's very turn heavy when you crest into the element and crest out of the second inversion, so just beware of that. But the variety of forces in the Batwing is really crazy because you can get like hang time during the inversions, but the valley in between the inversions is insanely intense. It's ridiculously intense. That's also where they take your on-ride photo, which I think is pretty funny. I usually love arrow corkscrews, but I feel like Vipers have been running really fast recently. I got a really trimmed ride on Anaconda at King's Dominion, and I like floated through those things, and I love that experience. So I actually prefer arrow corkscrews when you're going really, really slow. Because Viper is like fast-paced, non-stop, you kind of whip through those things. So you don't get any hang time, you don't get any float, which in my opinion is a negative, but I completely understand if you think that's a great thing. So overall, I really respect this attraction. It goes all out. Just like Riddler, it's not my type of ride, you know? It's alright. I can only ride it like once or twice in a day before it gets to be too much for me, you know? One thing I forgot to mention is if you're in the front row cresting into the brake run, you get like ridiculous airtime. Like that's a really solid airtime moment. So that's probably my favorite element to this attraction. Moving on to number 11 is Scream. Scream, Viper, and Riddler kind of feel like they serve the same purpose in this park's lineup. So it does feel a little redundant. Out of the 3 attractions, I feel like Scream is definitely my favorite. It does have a noticeable rattle, but the drop, all 3 of these rides are kind of uncomfortable to some extent, and I feel like Scream is the least uncomfortable. I do really like the 0G roll. I feel like the 0G roll on Scream is the best inversion out of all of the inversions on Viper and Riddler. Plus the drop is really flowy. It's pretty much like a modernized version of the Viper drop, so it's great. You can get some nice weightlessness. Speaking of which, you also have the vertical loop on Scream, which is just so tall and it's very big, so you can get some nice hang time there. Moving on up to the next tier of attractions at Six Flags Magic Mountain, we have 2 coasters that I consider tall, fast, and dumb, which of course means we're starting off with number 10, Superman Escape from Krypton. This ride is literally a massive L, and that's all it is. You launch for what feels like forever. You hit the spike, you go all the way up. You don't even go all the way up. You go like halfway up, maybe just over halfway up, and then you fall back down and you go back through that straight track. The launch isn't very forceful. You do get some nice weightlessness on the spike, but the ride experience is just beyond incomplete. It's just so short. Like, it's literally a one element attraction. And I get it's like, it's one of the OGs in terms of tall coasters. It was literally the first coaster to reach 100 miles per hour. And I would be very surprised if Six Flags is still launching this attraction at 100 miles per hour. My guess would be probably, I don't know, 75-ish, maybe. It doesn't feel like 100 miles per hour. The acceleration is very slow, so maybe that's why. You really don't get that high up on the tower. And what's really annoying is Six Flags has 2 tracks on this attraction. So if you're counting credits, it's technically 2 credits. The problem is they only run one, like ever. You're never gonna see this ride running both sides. I've been to this park dozens of times across multiple years, and I've never visited on a day where both sides of Superman are running. So just count on getting 1 credit if you're only visiting for a day, and hopefully you can come back to Magic Mountain at some other point, and hopefully they're running the other side, because it took me a few years to get both credits. When I first rode the attraction, I got on the right side, and most recently they've been running the left side. They also switched the left side to launch forward. So the left side launches forward towards the spike, the right side will launch backwards towards the spike. I don't think I really had a preference. Really, the only main sticking point about this attraction is that you should ride in the front row. Any other row, this ride is pretty meh to bleh. So it's alright, it's fine. It's really short, it's not worth a wait, and it has very low capacity, so it's just kind of a formula for a really mid attraction. Again, unless you're in the front row, because that wind can be really impressive. You really get the sense of speed, but other than that, it's there. Also, the sides of these trains have arm guards for all of the seats on the side, so if you're in the far left seat, your left arm is going to be trapped in this plastic box, and that's not the best. I wouldn't say it's uncomfortable, it's just awkward and weird. And if you're on the right side, it'll be the same thing for your right arm. So overall, it's just meh. Moving on to number 9, we have Goliath. This is the other tall, fast, and dumb roller coaster. Now, I'm gonna be honest, if I made this video a few years ago, I would have ranked this ride lower. Probably in the Revolution area, below Scream, Viper, Riddler. I think I found out how to enjoy this attraction. You ride it in the front row. This ride has no airtime, and it's a tremendous waste of potential because you slam to a stop after 2 elements. So it's just very disappointing that this is the hypercoaster that Magic Mountain has, because hypercoasters are some of my favorite coasters on the planet, and Goliath, it doesn't do anything, you know? The drop is shallow, and it's a static angle, so you don't get any airtime. The first element is a really boring turnaround, and then the airtime hill, which is probably my favorite part of the ride, it might give you some light floater, especially if you're in the front or back. Then after that, of course, you slam to a stop at the brake run. You go through some twisties. One helix actually has some solid positive G's that you will gray out at, but you know, this park has so many coasters that focus on positive G's that I really have no appetite for a hypercoaster that's only redeeming quality is a really strong helix. You can ride so many other rides at this park that have strong positive G's. A hypercoaster is supposed to stand out. It's supposed to offer something different, and Goliath doesn't do that. But again, if you're in the front row, just like Superman, you get that sense of speed, and I feel like it's a much better ride experience. So as much as I dislike this attraction for filling the hyper void at Six Flags Magic Mountain, it's okay. The front row is decent. Other than that, I'll just be complaining about it. So let's move on. The next 2 coasters are kind of in the B tier of attractions at Six Flags Magic Mountain, starting with number 8, which is Batman. B for Batman. This ride is pretty much everywhere. I've ridden it at Six Flags Over Texas, at SeaWorld San Antonio, and I've seen it at Six Flags Fiesta Texas, but I didn't get to ride that version. Anyway, this is a pretty solid layout. In terms of inverted coasters, Batman clones are not my favorite. The highlight of this layout are definitely the corkscrews, especially the first one, because you get some nice whip. I feel like the 0G roll is kind of overrated. You don't get that much whip. The 2 loops are decent. They are really short, so it can kind of feel like you're kicking the sky. But in terms of inverting coasters at Magic Mountain, I feel like this is one of the stronger ones. It just packs so much into that layout. I'm a pretty big fan of B&M inverts. In terms of inverting coasters, B&M inverts are probably one of my favorite models. If you want the best view, you should definitely ride in the front. The back kind of gives you some stronger positives. Moving up to number 7 is Apocalypse. I've talked about plenty of GCI wooden coasters on this channel, and Apocalypse is probably one of the worst that I've ridden. I would say Invader and this are the bottom 2 GCIs that I've been on. And that's not to say that Apocalypse is a bad ride. I just think GCI can offer so much more than Apocalypse. Gold Striker, Renegade, Prowler, Mystic Timbers are all in like a different league compared to Apocalypse. But if we look at the positives of this attraction, you have a really solid first half. I like how the drop is pretty unique, because after the lift hill you curve off into like a flat turn before you dive into basically a straight drop, which is pretty nice because a lot of GCIs have like a curved drop. Plus the visual of diving into the lift structure is really cool. I really appreciate that. You also have a nice speed hill in that first half. The first overbank has a airtime pop coming out of it, so that's really cool. I feel like that's one of the strongest elements that GCIs usually have. I feel like rides like Thunderhead do it a lot better than Apocalypse. After that, you go back under the lift structure into a turn that like it absolutely kills the pacing. I don't know why, but in this turn that goes through the tunnel, you absolutely crawl, and it's very noticeable. So I don't know why, it's just kind of weird. After that, you pop up into the station for the station flyby. Unlike Thunderhead, this one is enclosed, so it's really loud inside the station. You can view as a negative, to be honest. And then after that element, you might get some airtime cresting into the station flyby and cresting out of it, but once you complete that, the ride pretty much dies. Like the second half has like nothing. It's just a bunch of forceless turns. You have no airtime moments, and the grinding roughness really starts to set in. This is nowhere near one of GCI's smoothest attractions, so you should be aware of that before you get on the thing. It's just a lower tier GCI in my opinion. The reason that it's this high, I might sound like I'm being a little negative, is that GCI is one of my favorite manufacturers, so I might be holding them to a higher standard. This might also be the fault of Six Flags maintenance not taking care of this ride, which I would totally believe. I remember when West Coast Racers opened, this ride went through a refurbishment. When it reopened, people were praising it for being so much smoother, but when I got back on it, I thought it felt the same, so I was really confused. And now it's been a few years, and I think most people have like settled back down on it. People tend to overhype this ride, so I feel like we gotta put it back in its place. Like, there's literally nothing after the station flyby, so it's very much a first half ride, and the first half doesn't have highs that reach the highs of other GCI wooden coasters, so it's okay. Sorry if I'm sounding negative, it's definitely a solid attraction, which is why it ranks ahead of Batman. Plus, it has airtime moments, which are, as I mentioned, that's what appeals to me. I love negative G-forces, so that's also why Apocalypse ranks this high. I just feel like it could be so much better. Alright, the top 6 in this park I consider to be like their elite coasters, you know? Like their signature attractions. So I call them the Defensemen, because I am a big hockey fan, and when I hear top 6, I think of top 6 defensemen, because NHL teams have 6 defensemen on their roster. That's just my name for the top tier of attractions at Six Flags Magic Mountain. The first defenseman is West Coast Racers. This is just such a well-rounded attraction. I hate the trains. Getting in and out of them is really annoying and uncomfortable. Premier Rides has like kiddie coaster trains on thrill rides, which is so stupid. It's so hard to get in and out of their trains, and then you throw in a comfort collar and you have to like contort your body to get in there, or you have to like throw it on top of yourself and then like lean back into it. So you can't look cool getting into a Premier Rides train. You're gonna look like an idiot, so I don't like that. I'm sure most people watching this video don't want to look like an idiot while they're getting on a roller coaster. You're supposed to look cool, you know? You're supposed to be like, yeah, it's my turn. Let's do it, you know? You're not supposed to look like a buffoon. But Premier Rides makes you look like an idiot if you want to get on their attractions. At least their new ones. Anyway, this attraction is very well rounded. You have a really strong negative G-force moment with the high five. It's better on the higher side. So if you're in the right seat, it's going to be better on your first lap. And if you're in the left seat, it's going to be better in the second lap. But the nice thing about being in the right seat is you're going to do it on the white track. And during the high five, after the white five, you whip all the way back to bank to the right. If you're on the yellow track, you're just going to continue moving in that same direction so the banking doesn't have to switch direction. So it's a lot less extreme. So for that reason, I feel like sitting on the right seat is definitely better than the left seat because the white high five is better than the yellow high five. Speaking of that, the major appeal of this attraction is the fact that it's a dueling coaster and it duels every time, which fixes a flaw from another attraction that we're going to talk about. I don't really get the hype. I feel like Six Flags saw how popular Radiator Springs Racers was for Disney, and they're like, let's do that. So they built Twisted Colossus, and then they built this ride. I don't care, maybe because I'm an introvert, and I'm like, I just want to ride the roller coaster. I don't want to talk to you. Maybe that's why I'm not a big fan of the racing. I mean, it's a decent element. It's definitely cool to, like, watch another train go through a few elements with you, but like I would much rather enjoy the forces than watch someone else, and I feel like this attraction has really good forces, so it doesn't need to rely on the gimmick of being a racing coaster. But I guess the big pro about the racing is that you get to do both sides, so the ride length is literally doubled. You only have to wait in line once to experience both sides, which is definitely a great deal, especially when you consider that Six Flags' operations are absolute garbage. You're going to be waiting in line for this attraction for a long time. For my first ride, like when this first opened in December of 2019 for pass holders, I waited 3 hours for this ride. Part of that is because the capacity isn't great, but I feel like most of the problem is Six Flags' operations. So you might want to prioritize this ride if it's a priority for you, if you think it looks interesting. You should probably head here early in your day, especially in the back of the park. A lot of people don't want to climb the hill first thing in the morning to get back to West Coast Racers. Anyway, you do have a couple other floater moments. There's a transition between the two helixes that kind of gives some weightlessness. On the white side, the drop into the second launch also gives you some floater airtime. The 4 inversions all have great hang time. The main standout one is the stall, again, on the white track. So the white track is just better than the yellow track. So there's that. But I love the hang time during the giant corkscrews as well. There's a little bump going into the yellow corkscrew, and I feel like that does not give any airtime, so don't expect anything out of that. I've ridden this attraction multiple times in the front and back row, and I just think it's a very well-rounded experience. Moving on to number 5, we have Full Throttle. This ride is pretty much the giant loop. That's about it. The loop is insane. You get some ridiculous hang time. You can feel the lap bar holding your life. And yes, it just has a lap bar. It doesn't have comfort collars, which, by the way, are only there for your discomfort. So that's great. Anyway, I absolutely love the loop on Full Throttle. You should definitely go see where it ranks in that inversion video that I made. But on top of that, it literally has track on the opposite side, which is a super cool visual. It looks very interesting and unique. The airtime coming over the top hat in the front row is great when you're cresting into the element. When you're actually at the very top, you don't get any airtime because it's kind of drawn out, because the loop is drawn out, because it gives awesome hang time. And when you're coming back down, it's a lot steeper, so you get insane airtime in the back row. The major downside is that it has brakes on the drop. And I feel like I've talked about this element multiple times on the channel already. I personally don't like it, but I know a few people make the argument that you slam forward while you're in the air, so it makes it crazier. I think that's kind of ridiculous. I think you have plenty of time to land naturally and then slow down like a normal drop. Most every other roller coaster, after the tall drop, you have a layout to experience. So it's kind of a shame that Full Throttle's ending is so abrupt to the point where it literally cuts you off halfway down the giant drop. But overall, this attraction is very well done. It is shorter than West Coast Racers, but I feel like it has higher highs than West Coast Racers. West Coast Racers just can't compete with the airtime on the top hat or the hang time on the loop. Of course, you go backwards on this ride. That can also give some nice weightlessness in the front row, or if you're in the back row, you go back up through the dive loop and you get crazy hang time there as well. So it's incomplete. It's missing the second half of the ride, but it's still a really good attraction. Moving on to number 4, we have the giant B&M flying coaster, Tatsu. This ride is insane. It's like kind of terrifying. So this ride definitely is not a hypercoaster, but the way that it's situated over the mountain makes it feel like a hypercoaster. And going up that lift hill can actually be kind of terrifying because the vest is the only thing that's holding you in. And Tatsu makes you look straight down at the drop. So not only are you going up, but you're going up while the cliffside is going down. So the distance between you and the ground is just exponentially getting further and further away. So it's kind of terrifying. It's a little nerve-wracking. I say that as a seasoned coaster rider, so the way that the drop works, it pretty much throws you head first into the layout, so that's really fun. But after that, you curve back around towards the mountain so you don't drop all the way down. Tatsu saves that for the end of the ride with the massive pretzel loop, which is one of the most insane inversions I have ever experienced. You can feel the weight of the world on your entire body. It's absolutely ridiculous. You're being crushed for it feels like an eternity when you're down there. Like if you're in the back row, you feel insane G-forces pushing you into your seat while you're still diving down. So by the time you valley, you're like dying for lack of a better word. It's just an absolutely insane inversion. Tatsu also has 3 other rolls that twist you up, and it basically shows you the sky, which is really cool. I really like the first one because it's super close to the abandoned sky tower. So it just has a nice visual seeing that pop into your view and then disappear as soon as you spin away. So it's really fun. This ride is really a tale of 2 personalities because the height and the pretzel loop are kind of terrifying, but the ride itself is like graceful and peaceful with the turns and the rolls. But I know if you have a fear of heights, you're just not going to get over that. So this whole ride just might be miserable for you. But I think it's great. It's not like an elite roller coaster, but it's a very strong ride. It's by far the largest flying coaster I've ever ridden, and it's definitely my favorite. Moving on to number 3, we have the newest attraction in this park. It is Wonder Woman Flight of Courage. I already have a full review video about this attraction. I think it's a really great fit for this park. This is my type of ride right here. Wonder Woman has awesome airtime if you're lucky enough to ride in the back row. The drop is a great moment. The camelback is a great moment. The drop off of the turnaround is also amazing. And on top of that, you have the drop off the mid-course brake run. And even the dive loop has airtime. It's not as insane as the airtime on the dive loop on Railblazer, but it's still ridiculous that an inversion can give you airtime. The shoulder straps don't bother me too much. I just really love this thing. I think it's exactly what Magic Mountain needed, just a ride that's primarily focused on airtime. Even though you do go upside down 3 times, it's just absolutely amazing. You even have some great airtime moments in the front row. Obviously the camelback, which might be my favorite element. Cresting into that crow's nest turnaround is actually an insane pop of lateral ejector that really caught me off guard. And of course the return trip right before you hit the brakes is a bunch of airtime hills. These are really temperamental though. If the ride is running fast, they'll actually be like a solid finale. But if you visit this park in the winter time, they'll probably be pretty disappointing. But the last hill, this ride is technically a clone of Jersey Devil at Six Flags Great Adventure. So the last 2 elements were modified specifically for this park, and I can kind of tell because you don't get airtime during the 2 banks. One is like a mini wave turn and the other is like a proper overbank. They both kind of feel like filler elements. But other than that, I love this attraction. The inversions are top tier, the airtime is excellent, and the restraints don't bother me. Really, my major problem with this attraction is that you can't line up and pick your row. It's pretty much luck of the draw, but it's a very re-rideable attraction. It does have a slight rattle and a slight jitter, so you can't ride it like back to back to back to back, but you can definitely ride it multiple times in a day and still be satisfied. It's just an all-around great attraction, and I'm very, very happy Magic Mountain got this thing. Moving on to number 2 is probably the most insane experience you can ever have as a roller coaster enthusiast in the United States. It is X2. Holy cow. This drop is demented. It makes you look straight at the ground, which is pretty terrifying. It also flips you like an insane amount of times. It's very disorienting. When I was a kid, I watched POVs of this attraction like over and over and over again because I was like, how does this thing work? You know, it was really interesting to me. So when I actually got to go up and ride it, I knew when it flipped because I've seen the POV so many times. So I've never like had that experience of being totally disoriented because I have this like ride layout pretty much memorized. But it's still insane. It feels like unnatural. Like on most roller coasters, it feels like you're in control. Like you know how you're feeling, you know what the ride is doing. On X2, you do what X2 does when it wants you to do it. You have no decision making, like the illusion of decision making, I guess. Like you can kind of brace yourself, but when X2 wants to do a backflip, you're gonna do a backflip, whether you're ready or not. So this is just insane. And I feel like the prime example of that is when you go upside down at the bottom of the drop. Like you're still accelerating and X2 flips you from face first all the way upside down so that you're sitting naturally. What? That's wild. It's hard to process. This ride is just incredible. Of course, the major downside that everyone talks about is the fact that it's kind of rough. The outside Raven turn, which is the finale of the ride, can be a little brutal. The seats are like hard plastic and they fit really weird. So your legs aren't restrained at all, but your upper body is, which is pretty much the opposite of most roller coasters. So when you're going through that really rough patch during the valley of the outside Raven turn, your thighs will be bouncing up and down, and it'll be hitting the hard plastic of the seats. So that can be a little uncomfortable. One element that I feel like doesn't get enough attention is the freaking inside Raven turn. After the drop, you get launched into the air pretty much. And if you're in the front row, you get some like freaky airtime because, as I just said, your legs are free. So your legs will go flying up and it kind of feels like you're gonna fall out because that's a super unnatural sensation. When you get airtime, your upper body usually floats up, not your legs. So it's weird that your upper body is keeping your lower body inside the attraction. That's like totally backwards. It's so bizarre. It's pretty freaky and it's only like floater airtime, but it's insane. X2 has floater airtime and no one talks about it. It's ridiculous. So for that reason, you have to do a front row ride on X2. The back row will obviously be more intense. You'll get the pull down the drop, and also watching the vehicles in front of you flip was a really cool visual. It also gives you some like notice, like, okay, you're about to flip. So there's that. X2 is just unreal, and I love this ride, but it still isn't number 1 because I am a Airtime fanboy. So number 1 is Twisted Colossus, my glorious RMC Pookie Bear. This ride is awesome. You have multiple very strong Airtime moments. The 3 that come to my mind are the drop, obviously, the pop into the right after the drop where you're cresting into the high five element. That's like insane. Even in the back row, you get insane airtime. In a moment that the profiling, it looks like it would cater to the front row, it's also insane in the back row. You also have on the blue side, you have the camelback under the 0G stall, and both sides have the double up. And of course, that 0G stall is very cool. I love 0G stalls. It's kind of crazy that Six Flags Magic Mountain has 3 of them, but this one is probably my favorite. The 0G roll can be a little temperamental if you ride it on a hot summer day with a full train. It's very whippy, but other times, I visit Six Flags Magic Mountain in the wintertime a lot, and it can be a little floaty and graceful. So if you prefer aggressive whip, try to visit this park in the summertime, or maybe in like October. When the park closes at like 1 in the morning. This ride is absolutely incredible. There's pretty much no flaws other than the fact that it doesn't duel. But as I discussed with West Coast racers, I don't really care. My main problem with that is the fact that Six Flags operations are so slow. So the line moves so slow. They've only been running 2 trains on this attraction when it's designed to have 3 for like the past 2 years or so. That's really frustrating as a guest. It's literally been 2 years. Like I get seasonal maintenance is a thing, after years, it's you're the problem. You know, you're being cheap. You're making us wait in line for an attraction that should have a shorter wait. So gotta blame Six Flags for that one. Also, I don't like the finale on the green side. I feel like the laterals coming into the brake run are pretty uncomfortable. I don't like that. I'm also not the biggest fan of RMC restraints. They're really heavy for like no reason. So holding up the restraints for airtime room, it takes a lot of effort. So but if you have like the right grip and you know how to hold it up and push at the right angle, especially during the positive G-forces, you'll be okay. But yeah, Twisted Colossus, X2, Wonder Woman, Tatsu, Full Throttle, and West Coast Racers are absolutely incredible. I love all 6 of them. I love this whole parks lineup as a whole. As I mentioned, I'm an Airtime fanboy, so I feel like if you love positive G-forces and inversions, this is like your paradise, pretty much. I still love it, even though it doesn't cater to my interests in particular. They still have rides for me, because they have so many of them. So it's just absolutely incredible. You have to make a trip out to Six Flags Magic Mountain at some point if you're a roller coaster enthusiast. Please let me know if you agree with my list, if you disagree. I'm sure most of you probably won't even think that the top 6 in this park deserves to be in its own tier. I'm sure a lot of you would probably throw Apocalypse up there, or maybe one of the Inversion Machines. But yeah, that's my take on the coasters of Six Flags Magic Mountain. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will catch you later.